Many thanks to Professor Linardou for the introduction. And of course, to each and everyone at the Research Center for the Humanities, Professor Daniela, Dr. Despina Valatsou, and Athina Bozika, for inviting us to speak tonight within the framework of the Normed Research Initiative. I will shortly draft the basic premises of the joint talk and then move on to discuss smallness more concretely. I will speak for about 20 minutes. Then I will give the floor to Professor Anne-Helen Mydland, and then we will have ample time for discussion, I believe. First, I should set the institutional framework. I participate in Normed, not only in my capacity as a museologist and heritage professional, but also as an advisor, researcher, and representative of the Norwegian Institute at Athens, which is a foreign archaeological school owned by the University of Bergen. It's actually this connection and networking between our institutions that brought Professor Anne-Helen Mydland from the Faculty of Arts, Design and Music closer to the Institute. Anne-Helen has been on and off a research affiliate of the Norwegian Institute since 2023. And it's indeed a great surprise and joy to discover the common grounds that we share in terms of research interests. Kelly Linardou will introduce Professor Mydland more formally in a while, but for the purposes of our joint presentation, I'm particularly referring to Professor Mydland's long-standing engagement with and experience in developing EU projects, while being dedicated to her ceramic research and practice. She's deeply fascinated by the notion of smallness, a topic she has been exploring for quite a while. But more than anything else, Anne-Helen is a personality eager to share ideas and create nucleus of people working together. So thank you so much for accepting this invitation. Our joint talk tonight is actually an attempt first to sketch main ideas for Normed, anchored on the notion of smallness in relation to cultural heritage, specifically industrial cultural heritage. B, explore possibilities of collaboration based on those shared understandings of smallness. C, since Normed is actually heading for EU funding, we should address current EU political exigencies and agendas, such as the goals for social cohesion, sense of belonging, community empowerment, and the like, by thinking about potential outcomes that could steer innovation, synergies, and redefine skills and crafts. Since we are both coming from academic fields informed by cross-disciplinarity, namely museology, heritage, archaeology, aesthetics, art practice, and at the same time we are trained to work with academics and stakeholders alike, cross-sectorial outcomes without losing sight of the academic merit of their work is on focus. Now, having set the general framework, what is the red thread regarding smallness and industrial cultural heritage in our approaches? Anne-Helen has for years worked with ceramics, particularly porcelain, using artistic research to look at post-industrial ceramic factory sites and understand their meaning and potentiality for the future, a topic that she will be touching upon later on. While I'm interested in textile factories, small family businesses in Greece, thriving at the time of the country's early development. What made us join forces vis-à-vis the Normed project is the perspective of the insignificant, the micro context, the ignored, the brushed aside, traces of overlooked heritage, one for source of pride and income for various social groups in the 19th and early 20th century. I'm particularly looking not only in the buildings and the factory itself, but also at the family narratives accompanying the businesses. So the poetic of smallness relating to the politics of smallness. And at this point, it's quite important to stress that for Normed initiative, EU calls currently available set eyes on the overlooked by shifting the attention to less acknowledged sites and landscapes, reimagined through the lens of contemporary cultural and creative industries, such as architecture, design, craft skills, marketing, digital economies, performing art, and so on, arts. However, this discourse is not nostalgic. it adopts what Basil Bernstein, the British social pedagogue, back in 2000 has termed prospective identity. It's engaged towards the future. And in the case of EU, this is about an intensified awareness on pragmatic goals like climate change, sustainable practices, integration, new jobs, new markets. The thing is, of course, how to navigate around those goals set by EU in order to critically assess what might be relevant for individuals and for community contexts. So we have the agendas, we have the goals, but how can we sort of make a proposal that is critically reflecting those agendas? So this bigger picture aside, my inquiry started a few years ago when I came across the descendant of a family business, the silk mill at Methodological factory in Volos. A case of excellence in the otherwise fairly unknown region of Greek textile industry. The two brothers with an origin from Asia Minor started the business in 1924 and in 1928 were employing as many as 150 workers. This is the old factory in Volos. By 1935, the brothers expanded the exports to 12,000 kilos of silk of the most exquisite quality, sent mainly to Europe, Milan, Marseille, and Lyon, with just part of it sent to Athens. The factory soon became one of the most renowned in the area of Thessaly, where the cocoons mostly originated from, and Volos constituted the epicenter of the activity. During World War II, the factory was commandeered by the Italians. And silk was used to make parachute panoplies. In 1955, the historic building was damaged by an earthquake and ceased to function, while later on its original equipment was dismantled and transferred to Athens, thus putting an end to its use. Gradually, and for reasons relating both to the Greek post-war shift in economic activity and import-export growth, as well as to the microhistory of this family, the Ethnotome family, which is a very important point in my thinking, involving death and change. So the micro context again. The business was no longer prosperous, even in Ionia and Attica, where it was transferred. The building in Volos, on the other hand, owned since 1996 by the Volos municipality, acquired a new use, as it often happens, partly as cultural center and museum for the history of silk in Thessaly, thus preserving equipment dating to the last phase of the whole enterprise between 1962 and 1991. Those pictures are from the first phase of the factory before it was damaged. So this is my point of departure. That's how I started working with the idea of textiles. Sorry. And this is some of the silk. As mentioned, the story of the factory in its aftermath was made known to me through the encounter with one of the descendants. My initial focus was on buying some of the silk, that stock still in his possession, that he used to sell to Italy, to Milan, which I did. And you can see some of those. But after some time working with the idea of repurposing the silk for new garments and presenting this idea at a conference of sustainable heritage in 2021, I was somehow driven to start investigating the neglected story of cloth making in mid-20th century. With Norway, the dimension of smallness instigated a different methodological viewpoint. Alongside factual information about textile industry in the period bridging 19th and 20th centuries, personalized accounts which escape official institutional attention caught my interest. A main question would then be, how can the rationality of the archive and sturdiness of materiality be combined with the soft aspects of the story, the non-quantitative and graspable? What does it mean to wear the heritage? To carry this on to discovery? How small becomes the trace when it's down to a couple of individuals? Does it even exist? So this is for me a pilot study case, which is a personalized story I'm going to use and which involves me and my family. It's about the commercial activities of my great-grandfather, this guy, including the establishment of a textile manufacture. Factory is the word I keep in memory, as my mother used to constantly refer to this case as the factory, constantly bringing it up in her recollection. Alexandros originates from a village in Parnassos, Elatia of Rahmani, as it is known, the old name, where he first started his commercial activities and then moved to Piraeus when my grandmother was 4 years old. There, he expanded the former company into import-export and textile production, mostly cotton. Based on a couple of legal documents I discovered in the attic, I traced the evidence, namely the building, which might or might not be the original. My mother remembers that it was demolished, but this looks a little bit like a factory. At the moment, it's a kindergarten. And it's located, the plot surely is the same, Mavromichaili Street, number 18. And the location is in the Hagia Sophia Church area in Piraeus, today downgraded, half-ruined post-industrial zone near the train rails, with famous families as like the Papastratos tobacco industry family being opposite to the family factory complex. So that street was probably one of the most important industrial streets at the time. This trail opens up a whole range of inquiry, which I have started pursuing by contacting the sociologist Zizi Saliba, who has been doing archival work about Greek women workers in industry and manufacturing from 1870 to 1922. You can see the book. It's a very dense account of different women who work in industry and manufacturing, and especially about textile factories in Piraeus. And she analyzes both quantitative data and also qualitative, how was the work in the factory, what they were doing, how many, what was the conditions, what they were wearing, and all that, and also the working conditions. Piraeus was one of the biggest centers of activity during that period, with many textile factories in designated industrial zones. Another element of interest coming again from my mother's stories is the fact that Alexandros allocated part of the plot, this is actually the plot, now a parking lot for police cars since the 1970s, to feed the refugees coming from Asia Minor in 1922. As it becomes evident from Saliba's research, philanthropy and patronage was common practice for industry owners at the time. So it was not that the grandfather was so excellent and such a generous man, but it was something that we need to investigate, how philanthropy came into the factory life. My mother also recalls that among the refugees there were women from Smyrna, very skilled in loom weaving, and we still keep a woolen rag from that time. Sticking to the factual evidence, I also located a warehouse near the port of Piraeus, where exotic products from the Black Sea, among other regions, were kept, mostly caviar, which the family was pretty bored eating, so the story goes, and there were constant complaints about that. Other material traces left as factual witnesses are blankets made of cotton, woven probably 100 years ago and are still in use constantly. Some examples that I found in my mother's bedroom. Alexandros was not a high-class descendant, but an experienced merchant and probably an acclaimed citizen. Thus, he could enjoy the benefits of his profits. For instance, he could build nice houses for each of the family with marble staircases, piano, and the like, also within the factory complex. Thus, we can detect certain introductory points on gender, class, social care, together with geopolitical turmoil, military and political crisis, especially after the Smyrna disaster, which opened the research plateau, as this inquiry has very recently started. What is smallness in this context, and which part of the picture are we looking at? Unlike heritage sites filled with the aura of prominent collective traumas and what that could be, war sites, death camps, sites of natural disaster, radical socioeconomic change, deindustrialization, and so on, heritage is often about individual traumas, which we cannot really recognize. We rarely document, particularly when it comes to the personal dimension. I'm intrigued by the idea to explore what is left, both in and around the site, inside if possible, if I can get access to, but mostly outside the frame of the physicality of the enclosed space. We are dealing basically with fragments, material and intangible pieces of intimate stories, loved and even hated by the descendants, which are thought to be small in scale against the history of the nation, small in terms of the economic value they represent, the workforce, the infrastructure, impact on the region, small in documentation value, but otherwise small in what we can term archival footprint. They are hybrid constellations of material trivia, associations, memory snapshots, and intuitive reactions, remnants of all kinds. So is there a moment when this insignificant story becomes right for archive? When can that happen, and what is an archive? What are all those default of mostly oral history say about the community, a city, a nation, and what is there for the future? Could perils, for instance, be seen in different lights? Have we documented the stories of the particular textile factories, bigger or smaller, relating, of course, to factual growth, but also to loss and trauma, family fights and tensions of power? Could that contribute to communal and personal resilience? This is just a research question. Now, let us shift to methodological issues. We should all acknowledge the fact that emotions is something about 20 years of presence, especially in the heritage and museum area, but also in history, gaining momentum and epistemological importance during the closing decades of the 20th century. Seminal works such as Gaynor Kavanagh's Museum as Dream Space and Hilda Heinz, The Museum in Transition, especially the latter, written by a philosopher, is very critical, and I will explain, appeared before the millennium, either endorsing the therapeutic and healing power of the museum space as a dream place, or critically commenting on exactly this romantic idea and arguing that the emotive had become part of the spectral industry, addressing new audiences and clients. Most recently, Affective Heritage, further developing this idea of the emotive and the sentiment, mainly discusses prominent cases of notorious, sublime, picturesque, and traumatic heritage sites, as mentioned before, war camps and the like, which leaves the more personalized cases untold and even worse, without closure. Sticking to method, and of course taking any aid we can from this cross-sectorial work with sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists, and artists, to name, but probably the most important, I would suggest, because this is a very early stage of work, some of the tools that we could work with, and I'm particularly attracted to. Autoethnography, on the one hand, involves the researcher, which is also part of the story. So first-person point of view, reflective writings from memory, personal involvement with the described context. This is something that is gaining ground in the recent years. And of course, this kind of autobiographical accounts related to mostly history museums, informed by oral history, and oral history with its methods of documenting, reporting, editing, processing, can turn communicative memory, as it is termed in bibliography, which is everyday oral communication, turning this kind of memory into cultural memory. So we get the biography, the autobiography, then we move to sort of register it via the methodology of oral history, and then we kind of go from the commemorative memory, communicative memory, to a more sort of larger contextual, potentially scheme. And before I hand over the presentation to Anne-Helen, I would just like to stress a final point. Narratives of that kind, which combine this orality and materiality and trivia and things that we cannot really grasp, can be partially composed through hands-on activities, playing with traditional skills such as sewing, knitting, weaving, sketching, collage, also, of course, writing and exhibiting. So those are tools that Smallness, as it works with fragments, can prove very useful from a methodological point of view. So my last point is that Smallness, in my reading, is not only a concept, is not only the content, but it's also a method. So the fragment is a conceptual unit that can be encountered, of course, in the industrial heritage, in the factories, in our stories, but it's also a tool to work from bottom up, so to speak, and this is not a pun intended, to give us the opportunity to see how fragments and waste, not from an EU perspective of sustainability, but from reconsidering our lives and reconsidering how a fragment can give closure to stories that do not have that kind of wrapping up for us personally, could be a very useful idea. At this point, I would like also to mention and thank the anthropologist Elvira Riku, who invited me to organize an anthropological workshop, experiential workshop at her space in Bukaiki, or Art Space, a couple of weeks ago. And there we experimented with those concepts. So actually I'm not a hands-on person, but actually I can claim that I started thinking along those lines, which are completely unknown to me, but very much in my mind. So Smallness can also be something graspable, although it retains its conceptual soul. So thank you very much. And the floor is yours, Anne-Helen.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. I'm very happy and very pleased to be invited and honored, and together with Delia do this presentation and talk. I started working in Athens last year, literally after coming out of many years as a research leader and vice leader for research at my faculty. And restarting my research activity in terms of building projects on my own. And it has become already very fruitful, and particularly around kind of my mission is kind of twofold. One thing is I'm an artist, I'm a trained artist, and I work as an artist, an artistic researcher. So meaning that my artistic methods are my research tools. So I'll actually just use a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about artistic research, since it's a relatively new research discipline in Europe, and also that it has larger difference. So it's kind of contextualizing that a bit, and then I'll go more into some of my different projects, research projects, which then more feed into kind of how I think about Smallness in the normal context. So artistic research, there's kind of one heading, but it contains many meanings. For me, it's important to say that I'm from a Norwegian context, the Scandinavian artistic research environment, and how we kind of have developed artistic research have been same but different from, for instance, the UK and Germany, which is also kind of relatively large in terms of artistic research communities. But it meaning that still there's some course, and this has been, I think it's kind of the hard definition of artistic research in Scandinavian countries, that art and design practices are intellectual pursuits in their own right, not requiring translation to other terms in order to have sense or coherence. So meaning that I don't have to write about or talk about my work, but the artworks, which is my research outcome, has a language in its own right. It can be read by a peer as you read, as it says in the last one, as mathematicians read mathematics or philosophers read philosophy. So of course, there's all sorts of nuances in that. Personally, I also write, I talk, I do very many things as part of my artistic research practice, but still the core for me is not, I'm not doing publications as a traditional academic. It's not my main kind of objective, but quite diverse art projects, I would say. And I'll tell you a bit more about that afterwards, so you see that. So, Henk Borgdorf is one of the kind of the big theorists in artistic research, and I think he has this very kind of nice way of differentiating, you know, research on the arts or for the arts, and what we see as we are doing research in the arts, that the artistic practice itself is an essential component of both the research process and the research result. So this is kind of the core of the project and my methodology. Also in Norway, it's important to kind of literally situate how I'm talking about artistic research, because as I said, there are many variations throughout Europe in terms of how artistic research is positioned or funded or understood. In Britain, for instance, and the majority of Central European countries have their artistic research is placed under humanities, so having to kind of adapt and relate to humanities demands, which are kind of fair enough, but of course making it very text-based. So that is kind of something we are working very hard on, that, you know, acknowledging the art processes and methodologies and outcomes as valid results in their own right. And in Norway, we have been lucky enough to have it, literally because legislation very early on made us parallel in the law for universities and for research, that we were equal to scientific research. So we didn't have to kind of, you know, do the kind of adaptation bit. And I think we had a very active and smart environment in terms of saying this is a very particular point we have as a stronghold in a European context, so we can actually work with this to showcase how artistic research in itself is a valuable research discipline. So we've had what's called NARP, which is the Norwegian Artistic Research Program funding. For over 20 years, it's equal to the National Research Council, so funding large projects. I have had several of mine funded through that. And also, most importantly, they started a pilot for a PhD in artistic research. Not a dissertation-based, but a practice-based PhD. And in 2018, we got it from the state. So currently, just in my institution, we have over 20 artistic research PhDs. In Norway, these are fully funded positions. There's no self-funding PhD in any discipline. But seeing that we meet the requirements for the PhD, and we did this through 15 years pilot program called kind of, they qualify as research fellows and become associate professors after the completion. So it was a kind of test. We rigged it as a PhD before it formally became, and now it's there. So I'm very happy with that. And as a vice dean, I had the pleasure of literally writing out the first program description for the University of Bergen. So currently, the University of Bergen has 2 PhDs, the scientific PhD and the artistic research PhD. I'm very proud of that. No, but of course, we all know that we of course work very closely to humanities in all sorts of ways. We have so many common grounds, and we see how threatened in a way humanities and social sciences and, you know, the more softer, not mission-driven research is in Europe. And of course, art is also, or artistic practices is of course also part of that. So we're very aware of how important these kind of formal structures are in terms of safeguarding both everything from funding to workplace jobs, but also the right to be fields and research in their own rights. So that's what the big step was. Just wanted to mention that we have, in Norway, it's around 10 different disciplines within artistic research, filmmaking, dance, opera, all sorts of varieties of music, design, architecture, fine arts, crafts. Yeah. So a huge number, but we all, our PhDs are going to a national research team. So the research school for the PhDs are multidisciplinary and national. So they literally meet and they get exposed to a national multidisciplinary environment that has really been kind of, I think, a kind of a treasure in our environment and for development of and the kind of the common understanding that we work together in this, not only in the fine arts field or only in classical music, but that these are the common grounds. I've been leading many of these processes, and it's kind of pointing to my interest in working cross-disciplinary. I started my training as an archaeologist, wanted to become that. I found pottery shards and everything wonderful with clay, and then realized I wanted to work with clay and ceramics, and applied for the art academy and got in, and the rest is history. But anyway, so this, or understanding art as a way to really work interdisciplinary in the world, has been my kind of, driving force always. And this brings to my presentation. When we talked about Smallness, immediately kind of came back, or kind of, this is really where my practice started, doing my master's actually, where I worked around the concept of reprography, which I found in the text of Norman Bryson, talking about the still life. And for me, the still life and the reprography, not necessarily as a concrete genre, but as a concept, has been crucial. I also linked it together with Walter Benjamin's theories around the souvenir and the relic. Again, kind of focusing on the fragment as the potential and the fragment as the link, whether it's a relic or a bone or a personal souvenir. So back to smallness, again, in the fragment, sometimes a larger potential than a whole, you know, the concept of fullness is present. So just to kind of start with some sections from Norman Bryson's book, which I think is a very beautifully written book, and I recommend just everyone to read it. With, of course, presenting these two concepts around reprography and megalography. Megalography being the descriptions of those things in the world, which are great, the legends of the god, the battles of the hero, the crisis of history, the big things, the important. While reprography, from Dopos, trivial objects, small wares, and trifles, is the description of those things which lack importance. The unassuming material base of life that importance constantly overlooks. And for me, his quite poetic way of writing, I think it's very relevant in terms of also the topics of Norman and this. And I think, of course, this, as he goes on to saying that the concept of importance can arise only by separating itself from what it declares to be trivial and insignificant. Importance generates waste, what is sometimes called the preterite, that which is excluded or passed over. So for me, the kind of the duality of saying that if something is looked at and acknowledged, it means something is overlooked and not acknowledged. And I can look for it in my art. And art is a very great way of looking into the world. It's a pair of goggles which gives me actually a freedom and mandate to seek out very different, let's say, objects or places and ways of looking at it. Because I don't have to literally search for the truth, but I can claim and I can point. And actually the way that art as a practice sheds light by speculation and fiction is one of the strongest points of the methodology. So I will talk about two projects where these kind of core concepts, I will not kind of, you know, do like this, but I think this is kind of a good enough kind of framework for you to kind of bounce against. So in 2004, I was invited, working with ceramics and porcelain in particular, and family stories, which has been kind of the core material base. I was invited to China to a town called Jingdezhen, which is the center for porcelain production in China, always at ending. So they had a 1,000-year jubilee for the porcelain production, and they wanted me to do a project. And for me, in a way, China is far away, it's exotic, it's fantastic, everybody knows porcelain. But then it dawned on me that probably the most exotic thing about it, to use that word, was that it was used in my home in Skien, a very small industrial city at the edge of nowhere in Norway. That's exotic. And I realized how important Chinese porcelain had been in my family. My grandmother, which I grew up with, she would bring me over to the good cupboard, where she had the china and the good stuff, which were only out for the special occasions. She would bring me over, she would take it out, I was not allowed to touch it, and she would say, it's from China. And I understood how important it was. So, going through my family archive of photographs of it's me up on the lap of my great-grandmother's sister. This is in my mother's funeral. It's on my 18th birthday. Here I'm playing. This is my cousin's Alexander's birthday. This is my great-great-grandparents on the west coast of Norway. And present together with them is Chinese porcelain. So Chinese porcelain has been a witness to my whole family. Every occasion which was worth something has been witnessed by this porcelain. So for me, they're almost like a canvas on my family stories. These are stories which are embedded in them, and for me, if we think back to the still life, the power of the allegorical turn, that you empty objects from their original meaning and add more, that they always point out. They talk about so much more than just the original function or shape. So for me, looking at that and having it in my cupboard wasn't about that it's white and it has a pink flower. It was because it was literally soaked in, imbued, intrinsic to all of these experiences at once. So all of these objects dissolve time, they dissolve generations, they dissolve loss and death, because everything is in that personal souvenir. And then at the same time, I, as a professional in ceramics, know that porcelain is also this story. It is the story of the white gold coming to Europe through Marco Polo, probably the first hand, being the new big fashion in all kind of royal houses. Aristocracy collected it. They talk about the maladie de porcelaine. People spent all their fortunes on getting porcelain, and it's become a part of the fine art, not where I come from, but the fine art. It's there as a symbol of Christ, of purity, of the East, of the exquisite. And I also know that there's huge trade stories behind him. There are wars, there's the Dutch, there's the Portuguese, there's the Spanish fighting for rights. Everything from, literally marching into China to kind of claim rights for import or export. There's extreme global impacts coming out of this white material with blue decoration entered the world. It's also everywhere in our fine art. It's also set the style and tone for other types of ceramics, where we are alluding and trying to make it look like a porcelain. This is faience and majolica. And of course, we have all the architecture which has literally been built for and around it. But also what fascinated me, that it's one of the materials and objects which are not connected to the West and the West. Porcelain has been a global trade good and objects since they started. China used them very clearly as a political tool to have trading rights, particularly with the east coast of Africa and Southern Asia, So it was not this story about imperialists only, in a way, but actually, here you see from Kenya with Arabic tradesmen with porcelain collections on the walls. You have this massive, over 300,000 pieces of particularly Ming porcelain in Istanbul. So, and we also know that immediately with the Americas, they kind of were included in the kind of big porcelain trade. And also what's fascinating is that these objects they were made in the same place, in Jingdezhen, their region. They still are. They're even more or less the same shapes, the same techniques. And we use them in the same way. We hold them in our hand, we eat from them, we wash them, we break them, it's pretty much the same. And it's not so many objects which can claim that in our world today. So anyway, from the little table in Skien in Norway to this. And it's all connected by these small things, the cups and the plates, and the material skills around porcelain. Some of the trade routes. And the combination of, in one way, this is the emperor's table. It was an extreme, it's still an important object in China, everything controlled by the imperial kings and the imperial trade. And then at the same time, it's connected to this, which is kind of a second-hand web page in Norway, where the stuff that we had in our home now exists. And it's because in the Norwegian context, as a part of the identity forming of our small new little nation, we had our own porcelain factory. Because porcelain has always been connected to sovereignty of states. Meissen, Serre, it's been royal, it's, royal Danish. If you wanted to be a country, you had a porcelain factory. And so did we. It started at the end of the 1800s, in 87, the first kiln was fired. And to support the national identity forming, and also that actually there was a market, they stopped importing porcelain in this period until 1974, because we also had the war and protecting Norwegian industry after the Second World War. So actually what was in my household was some of the first import porcelain arriving in Norway since the mid-1800s. And it was really bad quality. It was really, really bad quality. It's thick, the decor is kind of not so good, but we loved it. We absolutely adored it. And we're proud of it and all that. So for me, meeting, fine arts and design history and learning that everything I thought was wonderful as a child was really bad taste. Has been one of the instigations also about what stories, who's giving value, and also knowing that made in China is, in the 1600s, the best thing that it could be. Today, made in China is really bad. You don't want that. So what happens? Who are in charge of giving value, saying what's good or not, what's good taste, what's bad taste? But also these things I know, because I've been in Jingdezhen, are actually produced, in Ming kilns, actually, some of them still. So where does the kind of value, who's deciding what is small and insignificant and what is important? So what I did with this project in the end was that I used the stamp, because the stamps are value markers, and they're very small, but they mean a lot. So I made these new stamps in the kind of ceramic way. It's a ceramic glaze, and you print it and you fire it to an object, and it sticks forever. So I used this and created kind of future archaeology. The objects I had from my family, I broke them into shards, fired them again now with a new stamp, and I brought them back to China, and I placed them out in production places, like in many places in Jingdezhen, the Gaolin mountain where the kaolin comes from, in Beijing, etc. And it will literally return to the soil of China. and perhaps puzzle some archaeologists 1,000 years from now. So it says, made in China, been in Norway, 2004. Because in a way, that extreme story of this very unassuming material is quite fantastic. So here I am in front of the Forbidden City. So I did a performance throughout China for 4 months and also working in Bergen for a while. And this project led me to create this work, which was bought by the National Museum in Norway in 2007, which is called Made in China, Been in Norway, My Grandmother Drank from China, where I'm using the photography documentation from the performances. And I made this cupboard, which is, I'm pointing to the Wunderkammer, where kind of the museum start, the collection start, porcelain starts entering. But this is a very ordinary kind of cupboard. It's also on the sides, I've kind of placed this narratives, you know, I kind of cut and paste, literally made collages out of all the different texts around porcelain trade, where you find porcelain in fine arts from the 1600s up until now, and also my own log from the whole journey, etc. So it's, in a way, I'm collecting all of these narrative strands about what Chinese porcelain kind of is coming from and how it's been kind of spreading in all sorts of layers. So there's stuff from, if you look at porcelain history just from, for instance, a trade and import and taxation point, that's one way of telling the story. You can tell a story about style, development from the Arabic merchants come and start ordering blue decoration because they have a cobalt to, you know, it's ending up at Norwegian tables, etc. Also, what I realized when the National Museum bought it is that this is all porcelain, not all is from my home, but a lot of it is from that. But I've been in flea markets and second-hand shops to collect and literally being given this very kind of not valued porcelain. And I filled the cabinet with that, and it's from the same period from which 1964 until 1989, when I moved out of my home. Childhood, and the cupboard is wallpapered with the images, as you've seen here, from my family photographic archive, where you see porcelain is being used on the table. But also by putting it in the museum, I realized that, of course, in the National Museum, there's actually a very good and extensive Chinese porcelain collection. But that's, of course, the Ming and the Qing and the, you know, the really upper class one. This porcelain is not put in that collection, but because of my work, it is. It's actually very well represented at the moment. So, in a way, it's also, by becoming part of the museum collection, it also, in a way, questions how a museum collects, who has made those collections, what are the premises for any collection, and again, what is overlooked in that collection. Now I'll just have a little look at the time. I have to speed up. But the next project I will show you, I will not talk so densely into it, but more put into it, because it's more about maybe where I'm at the moment in terms of developing EU application around overlooked and neglected cultural heritage. Meaning cultural heritage in the most conceptual, open kind of way, not just the object or the acropolis, but literally cultural heritage as intrinsic, as class, as skills, as also these kind of overlooked objects, which is also part of our cultural heritage, but it's not kind of within so. I led the project Topographies of the Obsolete for 7 years, together with a colleague of mine, Professor Neil Brownsword at North Staffordshire University. It was a huge project, taking its focus from the post-industrial site of Spode Works, which is the factory site where Spode ware, this bone china, were literally invented. And this old factory site had been running since 1784 until 2009, when it literally shut overnight. And all production was stopped, shipped out to Bangladesh in the first place. And of course, Stockholm-Trent is where Wedgwood, Minton, I mean, all of those kind of big, anything to do with ceramics in Britain is in Stock. And it's literally 6 towns built over ceramic industry. And what's particular in this place is also that all the cities are built around the factory. The factories are not in the outskirts and with the marketplace in the middle, but the other way around. The factories are in the middle and then everything else comes. So of course, when these huge parts literally die, the whole town dies. It's like a cardiac arrest of the whole town. And we, the University of, or we were still not the University of Bergen, we were still the Art Academy in Bergen, but I collected in around 40 participants working cross-disciplinary, so ethnographers, sociologists, historians, art historians, design historians, all sorts of arts, printmaking, performance, photography, etc. So around 40 with staff and students from 8 different institutions, worked there for 7 years by returning and returning and returning and imprinting ourselves into this factory. This is kind of just to show you the research strands which we had. We worked under kind of 5 main topics, all of us, and kind of answering to them, questioning them, responding to them in each our own manner and way. So it wasn't like a brief, you didn't have to choose, but I think we all kind of participated in the discourse and developed these kind of things. And of course, as I'm a professor in ceramics, the kind of the project, the platform of ceramic as a subject, not only an object, but literally a subject, that the role of artists in non-art spaces and kind of how ceramics is part of a globalized landscape. And kind of specifically also working site-specific for many years, how to relocate, how to translate site-specific artworks out and in of both gallery settings, but also from place to place. So this was kind of the overriding brief for all participants, no matter what discipline they came from. And for us, this kind of also how we can perceive the material of clay and ceramics to be or to constitute the site. So it's not about the ceramic itself, but in the way, or again, the allegorical method of how is the impact, what is the kind of everything else which ceramics of course kind of sucks in. And seeing that these towns are literally, and this is not nostalgia, it's not about reviving this again. It was awful. It was an extremely hard working conditions for everyone. Children were working, women were working, men were working because the salaries were so low, but they were highly specialized. It was an extreme, apart from China, this is the only place, or kind of globally, where you literally had this kind of very specialized segregated labor, so that one family would do glaze, one family would do a specific kind of handle. You had the copper plate engravers who only did these kind of patterns, you know, super specialized, like the Chinese. But of course, this is the condition. And what we realized, particularly coming in is in 2009, when everything closed down, is that the objects were taken care of. We have a system for that. It's in the museums, that's fine. But all the people, all this infrastructure, which was built for this extremely special way of working, it was nothing. It was in complete limbo in terms of not knowing where to put it. And nobody would say, but hey, this is very special. It's, for one thing, like industrial architecture from 1764 until 2009. It's also a factory which has been made great industrial innovation, for instance. There were a lot to point to. So seeing that this whole place was literally just overlooked. And also that all the people who had been working in connection and in the factories, their specific intrinsic knowledge and skill were given no value. So how to deal and work with this? And I think as artists, what we did was actually just by returning and making art, showing that there's something which is unanswered here. It needs to be dealt with. Either you need to, you need the closure, you need the last rites for this. You need to say either it's a ruin and it's going, or it's something still here, which is undeveloped. And we managed to actually be part of a cultural regeneration of this place. It was supposed to just be teared down and made into kind of a transport parking lot for a supermarket. And now it's small artist galleries, it's studios, and they made a small hotel, it's a cafe, you know. So again, it's not about, I mean, the potteries will never be the potteries again. But how can these people be proud of their history, their cultural heritage, all the knowledge they have, everything which happened, and take it into the future? Not as a kind of reconstruction, but as a fuel in a way. And kind of being proud of these things, but also we know that many of them, because this is an area of absolute despair, economically despair. And they are also like, yeah, they take care of the stuff, but they don't care about us. And I think this is, for us in the project, we have been mirroring it in many other towns which have the same thing. This is not only Britain, it's here, it's in Norway, it's everywhere. And by looking at how this kind of the porcelain trail or the porcelain impact around Europe, we can mirror it. We see in Norway, so I'm just going to be super quick around, I'm not going to talk about this now, come on. Delia has the publications we made from this project. It's a series of 6 publications, and also it's online. I wanted to show you this because for me it's something, again, porcelain as part of national identity and kind of state building, and seeing how porcelain and power is always connected. So it's megalography being associated with the great, but also being associated with the small. And that, for instance, still in the US, the new first lady will always make or design a new porcelain factories. So in a way, it's kind of the continuous story of being part of the large story in Europe, and also that it's literally not only in my family, but to all these very important situations, a witness to what's going on. It's also imbued. I mean, with the negotiations which are happening all over the world at the moment, porcelain is there. So I'm working on this and connected to, for instance, in Norway, this is, we have one porcelain factory, which was, then made in the late 1800s. This, as all the other porcelain factories, went belly up around the year 2010, 2009, and shipped out just because it was the way it was. Now it's a shopping center, it's a cultural center, there's a collection, there's some old workers sitting and hand decorating things to make it kind of look like we're still producing. But in Norway, compared to Stoke, we have a lot of money. We have a lot of oil money, so in a way, we don't have industrial rooms. We don't have contemporary rooms whatsoever. Again, that kind of we end up by kind of overlooking the traumas which are happening in society, because these jobs still went out, people got other jobs, but also there's in a way, it's a trauma and a crisis which happened, which almost was taken away. It wasn't kind of really, I think, dealt with in a deep way. So you can say you just put on a very glossy band-aid and you keep on walking like nothing's happened. And of course, it's probably a better fate than Stoke, but in a way, it also shows different way of handling trauma and handling the narratives we create of success or not success. I live in Bergen, where now, because of the oil industry, in a way, it's just at the moment where it starts to become a ruin. But it's still, it's keeping its breath. We keep it. It's not decaying quite yet, but it's on the verge. So these kind of the visuality of saying, we're fine, we're a nation, we're on our own feet. I mean, what would Norway be without oil? What is our identity then? So again, which small stories are needed to actually maintain or kind of how we create those identities in them. through production and through kind of the oral histories here. I think also with factories there, you know, you have the house and the infrastructure and the objects, but it's really everything, all the people who's found autonomy there somehow and found meaning, which is where we want to work now. So I'm putting together an application where we work with porcelain cities around Europe, north, south, east, west, particularly to look at the overlooked stories around skill, because it's about very highly skilled people. It's not industry in the sense of just doing this, it's really manufacturing. So it's, you know, highly skilled, which is literally on the verge of just dying out. I think it's also because it is about class very much. It's also very much about gender. There were a lot of women working in these factories, particularly because, you know, the handwork, literally. But also, of course, this kind of it's a working class too. And I think that is still something which is a bit contested talking about, but I think it's definitely needed. And also I think particularly in the current situation in Europe, where we also have more immigrants entering into that sphere. How will they be connected to this? How can our cultural heritage, which is situated, become everyone who's situated's cultural heritage? And that's where I will start. Thank you very much.